2:15 this morning, we got up and went to a restaurant and got to watch a man get really, really angry and scream and yell and holler and threaten people, and everyone gets scared and frightened, and it's a lot of neat people, you know, a lot of neat people in this world. It was kind of exciting because the first thing I woke up to this morning was my 14-year-old daughter in a good mood, and a friend that she brought with her in a good mood, and I walked outside, and this great big gray-haired wanderer in a red jumpsuit says, "Has anyone told you they love you?" And I thought, "Not yet." He said, "I love you." And I thought, this is neat. You know, men I know well don't tell me they love me, and strangers do. I think I've done the deal wrong all my life. I'll stick with strangers. I started drinking, and I really believe I started drinking because there was something wrong with cricket. There was something wrong with the inside of cricket. But that something wrong with the inside of cricket only showed itself on the way I perceived the outside of cricket. I was born into a family that society called illiterate. I didn't know what they were talking about, but it meant that we did not know how to read or write, and we didn't. We made our living following crops all over the United States. And I loved that way of life. I loved following crops. I liked digging in dirt. I liked picking fruits and vegetables. There was only one thing about the lifestyle I did not like. Every time the fruit or vegetable season changed, we moved to a new place. And every time we moved to a new place, we started a new school. I have a total of 4 years of education, and that wasn't all in one whack. But every time I started a new school, it seemed as if my hair were blonde, then maybe the other children could play with me and like me. If I were taller, maybe I could fit in. I always felt like the outside of cricket. People were afraid to let their children play with us. They considered us gypsies. My father, I never met the gentleman, but he sired 17 children, and so I know some things about him. I know he was a very potent man. None of us met him, so I know that he knew how to leave a whole lot. He was full-blooded French. My mother was full-blooded Black Irish. And the combination really created some nuts in the family, and I was the one. They have an old Irish superstition that there's one child in each family that's born evil. There's one child that's born possessed. And you determine that child by their weight at birth. Whoever weighs the least is possessed. And I weighed 2.5 pounds when I was born. So I came out with an attitude, I think. And that attitude was perpetrated by beliefs, by superstitions. As we followed those crops and as I grew, I had to find a hiding place. I had to find a place where cricket could be safe. I was raised in the type of family that when the sun goes down and it gets dark and children are supposed to be able to run in the kitchen door or the front door, and they're supposed to be able to say, "Mama, I'm home," and feel safe, warm in the winter, cool in the summer. We didn't do that. We couldn't do that. We ran outside. We didn't know what was outside, but we weren't afraid of it. We knew what was inside, and we were afraid of it. Because of following crops, we didn't have electricity or water or those kind of things. I had real bad skin, and we went to church twice a year, and we went for very selfish reasons. At Thanksgiving and Christmas, ministers tell their congregation that they need to feed the poor people. They don't tell them that the other 10 months of the year, but Thanksgiving and Christmas, if you hit a good old Pentecostal or Baptist church, you're in for some treats. In exchange for getting a big basket of food, we'd sit and listen to a minister stand behind a podium. Probably what the man said was true. He didn't know what the little girl heard. The gentleman said, "Anything you ask for in the name of Jesus, you'll receive it." And see, my teeth had rotted out, my hair hung down to my knees in tangles, and I had real bad skin. And what I wanted more than anything in the world was clear skin. Because if I had clear skin, these people wouldn't be afraid of me. These other girls would be allowed to play with me if I just had clear skin. So I heard this gentleman say that, and I went home and I found a place on my face that didn't have a pimple, and I put my finger on it, and I did exactly what the minister said. in the name of Jesus, when I waken in the morning, make the rest of my face as clear as this spot is right here. Because, see, I didn't want Jesus confused. I wanted him to know where I was talking about. But when I woke in the morning and went to the mirror and looked in, there was a pimple right where I prayed. So I knew Jesus didn't like me. And I had been looking for a hiding place. I needed one. I needed a place where Cricket could go and turn off everything around her and be safe, where nobody could get to her and hurt her, not just physically, but the hurts that go in the hearts, the hurt that goes in the head, the hurt that creates monsters. So I chose the wood stove, because that's how we heated our home and that's how we cooked in our homes. And I'd crawl behind the wood stove, and I'd curl up behind that wood stove, and I'd pretend. And I'd pretend that I had blonde hair, because everyone knows blondes have more fun, you know. So I'd pretend. And I'd pretend that maybe I had great big blue, beautiful eyes. And I'd pretend that I had real clear skin. And I'd pretend that I had nice teeth. And I was pretending. None of those things were valid. I had the color of hair I had. I had the color of eyes I had. And I still had no teeth and bad skin. My brothers brought me a wonderful present behind my wood stove. They didn't want me to tell on them because they became armed robbers. And if I wouldn't tell their secret about armed robbery, they'd give me this jug in a brown paper sack. My first drink of alcohol was whiskey. My last drink of alcohol was whiskey. And when I took my first drink of alcohol, and I remember it as vividly as I do my last drink of alcohol, I took the lid off the whiskey, and I just turned it up and started drinking. And it burned. It burned my throat, it burned my chest, it burned my arms, it burned all the way down to my toes, and it burned all the way back up again. And I kept drinking. I kept drinking. And after drinking that whiskey, I found out that it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I went before this person called God, and I was 12 years of age, and I said, "Dear God, sir, I don't really believe in you, and I don't believe in family, and I don't believe in cleanliness, and I don't believe in goodness, but on the slight possibility that there is a God, I have one prayer for you, sir, and this is the last time I'll ever ask you for anything. I want you to help me never feel again. And see, sir, I don't even want any special favors. I don't even want to feel good. Just help me not to feel again." With the help of a lot of whiskey and a lot of society, that prayer was answered in a few years. I started running away from home. The state of Colorado stepped in and told me that 13-year-old girls do not live on the street, digging in garbage barrels, getting that bottle that people throw out that still has a little bit down in the corner. 13-year-olds don't do that. I did that. And in order to change that, they had to send me to a place called the Morrison State Reform School in Morrison, Colorado. They did not recognize teenage alcoholism back in the middle 50s. They sent me to this reform school, and they classified me as being incorrigible. And once again, I didn't know what they meant. And what it meant was that I was a 13-year-old girl that no adult could handle. And I guess that was pretty true also. I stayed there a year, and I was released and went back to my mother's home. Learned a whole lot of stuff in the reform school. Not necessarily academic, but I learned a whole lot of coping skills that you need when you live on the streets. I stayed in my mother's home for about 2 hours, and I told her I had to leave. And she didn't try to stop me. The woman truly did not know how to care. And I left my mother's home, and I stayed on the streets again for 3 more years. At the age of 16, the state of Colorado stopped me one more time. They picked me up. They still did not recognize teenage alcoholism, but they had to put me somewhere, so they once again labeled me. They labeled me schizophrenic, with paranoid reaction, with psychotic tendencies, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I had 8 years of sobriety, and my sponsor said, "Darling, schizophrenic means you're two-faced," and I am. Paranoid means you think people talk behind your back, and they do. And psychotic means you'd rather kill them than yourself, and I would. You know, see, I think that's sound mental health. Al-Anons have a good market on that, I bet. Ask them if they'd rather kill the alky than themselves. And so they committed me to the Colorado State Insane Asylum in Pueblo, Colorado for 18 months. Their cure for my sickness was to give me Valium 4 times a day, 25 milligrams, Librium 10 milligrams 4 times a day, Thorazine 50 milligrams 4 times a day. They also decided I needed to be one of the original people that got electric shock treatments. And these were so intense that sometimes they would have to medically resuscitate us. But for a year and a half, I didn't want to drink. When I went into the state hospital, I weighed about 70 pounds. When I left, I weighed 300. I could not get out into the sunshine because of the effects of the Thorazine. The electric shock treatments were the most terrifying experience I've ever been through in my entire life to this day. They were something that you talk about feeling powerless. You are. You're real powerless when a group of gentlemen and ladies lay you on a gurney and they put a row of gauze in your mouth and they hold you from your neck to your ankles and they put a band here with sticky stuff here and they tilt your chin back and the only thing you can control is your eyelashes, your eyelids to open or close them. And they look down at you and they say, "Are you afraid?" Yeah, sucker, but I can't answer you. You know, you've got me in a state of total powerlessness. Yes, I was frightened. I woke with fear. I slept with fear. I walked with fear. And my only defense was that original prayer, don't feel. Don't feel. And I learned a lot in the state hospital about not caring. When I walked out the doors of the Colorado State Hospital, I was a zombie. A 300-pound blithering idiot that could step over somebody dying and not care, that could watch a child burn and not care, that could see a person go hungry and not care. Nothing, nothing. My heart and my soul had died. The only thing left living was the body that held it, and that was it. As soon as I left the Colorado State Hospital, I went right back to the only friend I had ever had in my life, alcohol. I went to the nearest beer joint and got my friend. That was my constant companion. That was my only source of warmth. That was my only source of comfort that I remember in my entire life. I wasn't quite 18 years of age. Right before I was released, I went before the Psychiatric Review Board, and they informed me that I was on a lifetime temporary release. I'm 51 years of age, and they tell me I'm still a blithering idiot for the rest of my life. I can't vote. I can't serve on a jury. I have special permission to have a driver's license, and all of those things are okay, but see, I'd just been there for 18 months, and I said, I don't understand what you gentlemen mean. And they said, well, Cricket, you can't help it if you hurt people. I beg your pardon. And they said, if you hurt someone, you can't help it, so we can't punish you. I said, you mean if someone makes me angry and I kill them, you can't do anything? And they said, of course not, because you're sick. You're mentally ill. And I said, hot diggity, I like this. There's a lot of people I don't like. Still to this day, there's a lot of people I don't like. But I don't use that to allow myself to get away with inappropriate behavior. And to me, inappropriate behavior is anything that separates me from God of my understanding. That's my guideline for inappropriate behavior. When I left the state hospital and they had given me this freedom, total freedom, to do anything I wanted, whenever I wanted, wherever I wanted, with no consequences. It wasn't freedom. It was the worst prison anybody could ever be in their entire life, because I had no restraints, no fences, no guidelines. It wasn't freedom. I left there and I started traveling all over the United States, me and the Greyhound bus. And I'd go to new cities, and I'd go to new towns, And my priority, as soon as I got to a new place, was to find a beer joint. I wasn't a housewife drunk. That doesn't make me different than a housewife drunk. It means that I just was planted in a different garden. So my choices had to be different. My drinking was right out front. I was a street alcoholic. I think it's easier for female alcoholics like myself to get sober than it is for the woman that hides behind her husband's checking account, that hides behind the social PTAs, the church groups, and the home, because people knew what I was. The high bottom, quote unquote, female alcoholic, people couldn't understand. They didn't understand that her pain was the same as mine. Her loneliness was the same as mine. Her desperation was the same as mine. Because how could she hurt? She had everything in the world going for her. And I loved it when I got into AA and I had some of the women alcoholics tell me, you know, I never sold myself. And I thought, yeah, you did on a daily basis to your husband. You know, there's a lot of female alcoholics that lived with the same man for 30 years and couldn't stand the creep, but he bought her booze. That's just as close to prostitution as anything I ever did in my life, in my opinion. They just had one client all the time. I had no desire to change my way of life, ever. I enjoyed moving. I enjoyed no bonding. I enjoyed all of that, I thought. I went back to Denver from Missouri. I was in Kansas City, Missouri, and they asked me to leave their fine city and not return. There was something about, they have a Pony Express statue in St. Joseph that they're real, real proud of. And I made it into a girl, and they didn't like that very well. And when they picked me up in Kansas City, they asked me to leave. I was one of those drunks who doesn't remember everything they did, and I never know why I did what I did, but on occasion I'd still have to run to a church, you know, drinking. See, every now and then I'd have this feeling of desperation, and I had to find this thing called God. Somehow, even though I didn't believe in him, there had to be something. And I'd go in churches and I'd hear ministers and I'd sit there drinking, and I'd hear them tell all this stuff, and I'd think, why doesn't that work? You know, why is that God so prejudiced? Why is their God so good to them? I don't understand that deal. I walked into a church in Kansas City, and that's how St. Joseph caught me, because there was a minister, and he really made me angry. He was standing up behind a podium, and he was talking about casting the first stone, you know, and I thought, I don't understand that. And he's hitting the podium, and he's saying, let that one amongst you without sin cast the first stone. And I thought, hey, bud, give me the rock. And I stood up and told him that. And he called the police and asked me to leave. And I got a little rebellious. You know, I didn't want to leave. I was there. I wanted salvation. I wanted the whole thing, I thought. And I continued doing those things. I continued going to beer joints. I continued finding my bar stool. I continued living in the dark world of beer joints where you can't see anything because it's dark. You can't hear anything because it's loud. You associate with people on the bar stool next to you that you don't like, and they don't like you. I love it when Al-Anons ask their husbands, what did you do last night? Didn't do anything. Were you with another woman? Well, she was sitting next to me at the bar stool, but we didn't do anything. See, there's a game that happens in those beer joints. The male alcoholic will come in, and he will see a little female alcoholic sitting on a bar stool all alone, okay? And he'll sit down next to her, and he'll give the big old alcoholic sigh. And he'll kind of raise both shoulders up, and he'll go, ah. And the little alcoholic female knows here's a sucker. So she turns and she looks at him, and she says, what's the matter? And he says, oh, you wouldn't understand. Give me a chance. He said, well, I work all the time. Take my check home to the wife, give it to her, take care of her, support her. And all I want to do is stop off for a drink now and then with the boys. Well, no one came in with him but himself. I don't know where he left the boys. And when I go home, she's going to be in the middle of me, and see, the little alcoholic female looks at him and she says, you know what? if I had a man like you. Well, his ego immediately is better. You know, he feels good. He's macho now. I wouldn't treat him that way, but inside the little female's saying, sucker. And then he looks at her and he says, darling, would you like me to buy you a drink? And you say, if you want to. That's all you want out of him anyway. And the evening proceeds, and you may or may not wind up in a motel with this guy. And he goes home, and I didn't know this till I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, sitting at one of my first meetings in 1969. The men alcoholics, there weren't a lot of females back then, they'd sit around York Street in Denver and they said, you know, put a sack over a woman's head and they're all the same. Let me tell you, you men are too. You really are. The difference is, us women could always do it, okay? So if your male alcoholic ever came home and told you, sweet Al-Anons, they didn't do anything, they didn't. And we were real glad. We didn't know their names and they didn't know ours. And to me, it's real important for an Al-Anon to remember, who'd they come home to? Who'd they come home to? Who kept that door open for them to come home? Must have been something bigger than you or I. Must have been. On our own, we couldn't do it. I'm real glad I'm not an Al-Anon, because I would have used that insanity plea. A man come home and tell me he didn't know where he'd been, I'd have beat the hell out of him and said, you're right, you don't. He woke up with knots on his head, says, hell, I don't know, you told me you didn't know where you were. You came home in that condition, bud. Sorry about that. I don't know who hit you. I would not have made a good Al-Anon at all. I guess God, in his magnificent way of designing, knew which organization I needed to be in the most. I continued doing that, and daily I died. A week before I joined the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was having dinner with a man in a pizza place. And somebody walked in. I'd ordered hamburgers and french fries. And somebody walked in, and they had a resentment. And they pulled up a shotgun and shot this gentleman right in the face. I couldn't feel anything. I could not feel anything. I didn't feel that instant revulsion. I didn't feel that instant, oh my God. I felt absolutely nothing. A week later, I attended my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And let me tell you why. Because I was sitting in a beer joint on a bar stool, and a member of AA took his Al-Anon wife there every Saturday night so that she could dance. That was before they had AA dances. And he came up to me and he said, Cricket, my wife and I have watched you for quite a while now, and we think you have a drinking problem. And I looked at him and I said, buddy, I don't have a problem drinking. It's something I can do real well. He said, no, Cricket, we think you're alcoholic. 'Cause see, you're here every day. You do things that you don't remember doing. You say things you don't remember saying. You go places you don't remember going. And when you start something, you can't stop it. And I thought, everybody does that. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. If you go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous with my wife and I tomorrow night, and you can stop drinking, then I'll leave you alone and I'll never say anything to you again. I said, no big deal, boy. I'll go to a meeting with you. He said, okay. Now when you go home tonight and get up in the morning, don't take that first drink. I said, that's not a problem. I'll go home tonight, I'll get up in the morning, I won't take that first drink. At this time, I weighed 76 pounds. I was cute. Had hair down to my butt, no teeth, ugly. Smelled just as bad as I looked. And I woke up the next morning and did what I had done every morning for years and years and years. I reached to the side of my bed, pulled up my bottle from the floor, sat up and raised it to my lips, and my hands were trembling. And today I know it was the mercy of God. I could not take that first drink of alcohol. I got violently ill at the smell coming out of that bottle. That just didn't happen to me. That just didn't. I never had a problem taking a drink. I could not take one. That gentleman called my home about noon and he said, Cricket, this is Harry. Have you had a drink? I said, no, fool. Told you I wouldn't, don't even want one. And he said, "Are you still going to a meeting with us tonight?" I said, "Yeah." "Told you I'd be there, I'll be there." And he said, "Do you need a ride?" I said, "I don't need anything from you. Don't want anything from you. I told you I'd go to that meeting, and I'll go." That was on October the 19th of 1969. From that day to this, I have not taken a drink of anything containing alcohol. Thank God. I was 28 years of age, and when it got close to time to leave for the meeting, I had never driven a car. Never, because I wasn't allowed to have a driver's license. And I guess if having a DWI is a requirement for membership, maybe I don't qualify, because I've never had one. I called a cab, and for the first time in many years, I felt a funny feeling inside of my heart. Didn't know what it was, but it was different. And the closer we got to that AA group, the funnier this feeling got. I could figure out what alcoholic meant, but anonymous was a real frightening word to me. I was a crop follower's kid, so I never knew racial prejudice. And anonymous sounded like Ku Klux Klan type stuff. And I wouldn't let the taxi driver let me out right in front of York Street. I made him let me out a half a block away because I was embarrassed. And I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was a red-headed lady there. Her name was Sharon. I saw her this past year in Las Vegas, her husband, and they remember me. She walked up to me and she said, "Hi, my name's Sharon. Are you an alkie?" And I knocked her on her rear end. I didn't want her asking me a question. I didn't care if her name was Sharon, Linda. I didn't care. Why did she have to come up and ask me if I was an alkie? That's like calling me inebriated in a beer joint. Call me something I understand. And some of the gentlemen turned to her and they said, "Sharon, have you told her we care?" She said, "Not yet." Now, this has been many, many years ago. They had some practices that they quit after I was there for about 2 weeks. They used to pass the little wicker baskets. They still do that. But when I was brand new, they'd say, "If you've got it, put it in. If you need it, take it out." I sat on the back row. They used to say, "Take what you can use now. What you can't use now, come back and get later." I took their adding machine, their typewriter. I broke into the Coke machine. I was sober 3 days at York Street and went into DT's. And this was back in the days of orange juice and honey, and people caring about one another enough to stay with you 72 hours until you got over that. And then they walk you through the deal. I stayed sober in Denver 6 months before I had to leave. I was sober 2 weeks when I met my first group of bleeding deacons. But I didn't know what they were. I was sober 10 years before I found out what bleeding deacons were, and they've never asked me to join their organization. But this group of men, and what it truly is, it's a group of people who know not just the recovery part of this program, but the 12 traditions and the warranties and the concepts. And this is a group of people who care enough, not just about themselves, but about the crickets coming down the road, about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, to not allow someone like me to destroy it. And they approached me, and I was real glad, because see, I thought they were going to kick me out. And I really wanted to go back to my beer joint, real bad. And they came up to me and they said, "Cricket, we need to talk to you." And my heart started beating fast. I got kind of excited because I knew what they were going to do. I'd been kicked out of enough places. I knew the routine. And they said, "Cricket, we're not going to put up with your stuff anymore." And I just wanted to giggle. I thought, good, beer joint time. And they said, "Cricket, we can't kick you out." And it was like somebody had kicked me in the guts. And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Because our traditions won't allow us to." And I said, "Tradition? That sounds like a social disease, and I was always proud I didn't get one." And they're here quoting a tradition at me. Be real careful. Watch how they're abused today, and maybe my definition was real close to being right way back in '69. These men told me that the traditions said that for anyone who suffered from alcoholism had a right to be there if they had the desire to stop drinking. And see, they made me responsible. They put it right back in my lap. I didn't want it there. I wanted them to kick me out. That way Harry and his wife can't say I was weak. Harry and his wife can't go back to the beer joint and say, "She couldn't do it." They can't. Harry and his wife would have to go to the beer joint and say, they kicked her out. It's not her fault. She's going to die drunk. It's not her fault. The traditions kept cricket alive in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was approached with 6 months of sobriety by the Narcotics Division of the Denver Police Force and told I had to leave Denver. And I got real baffled. I said, why? 6 months. I haven't done anything. Do you all realize what a group of alcoholics are, sober? And the police department said, yeah. And I said, you talk about weird people. Those people are weird, and I can't do anything until they kick me out. And they said, Cricket, we know that, but you still have to leave Denver. I said, where am I going? They said, Cricket, you're moving to Fort Worth, Texas. I said, wait a minute. Drunk, I never went to Texas. And sober, you're telling me I have to move to Texas? Because, see, I had quit, my mind had quit developing. I said, do you gentlemen know what Texans do? They've got goat ropers, tumbleweeds, and they use corn cobs. And I'm raised in outhouses, and we use magazine pages, okay, and newspaper. Corn cobs was beyond my imagination. And they said, regardless, you have to move to Texas. I said, I'll go, big boys, on 3 conditions. I want a high school diploma. I want 3 cases of the softest toilet paper made by mankind. And I want a car with a driver's license. They said, no problem. And I don't know why people make a big deal out of a GED. I went down, a lady read me about 5 questions, and I got my GED. They gave me 3 cases of toilet paper. They gave me a 58 Rambler station wagon. And I knew these men were supposed to be more intelligent. I've got 2 legs. They give me a car that has 3 pedals and expect me to know what the hell to do. I mean, I'm going like this, and you're supposed to do this, this, and this, and I couldn't do any of it. And I went down to take my driving test with special permission, and I could only work 2 gears, the one at the bottom and the one way up here. About my 5th day in trying in a row, this one Denver police officer looks at another. He says, I am not getting in the car with her again. And they all kind of looked at each other. There was something about it, and I knew they didn't understand that I knew how to operate it. You park it where you've got a jumping place, and you're okay. It's that initial surge that I think frightened him. And this older police officer said, don't worry about it, fellas. I'll take her out. And this gentleman and I went out and got in that 58 Rambler station wagon, and I turned the ignition key on, and he said, Cricket, you passed. I said, they just didn't know how to test. We went back into the place, and he tells them she passed, and they all looked at him real strange, and I heard him under his breath say, the minute we give her her driver's license, she has to leave Denver. See, the GED, the toilet paper, the driver's license were gifts to get rid of me. I had those gifts all my life. Gifts to get rid of me, not gifts to hold me. And so I left Denver, and I did everything they told me to do. I do know, once again, I listened to them, and they told me I had to go through Lake Whitney from Denver to get to Fort Worth. There's no way. There's no way you have to go through Lake Whitney, Texas to get to Fort Worth from Denver. But I had to meet this spiritual giant named Bob White. And I drove up in Lake Whitney, Texas, in front of a little real estate office, and this gentleman, I honked on the horn, had my running start, and this gentleman came walking out to the car, and he said, hi, I'm Bob White. And I gave him the finger and said, I don't care. And he looked at me and he said, you must be Cricket. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, can I do anything for you? And I said, no, buddy, don't need anything from you. I was told to stop and see you. I've stopped, I've seen, adios. And I went into Fort Worth. I had done something to that car. Once I got into Fort Worth, I got a little bitty room above a grocery store, and the car would never go again. But I did the next thing I was told to do. I called the Southwest Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And a gentleman answered the phone, and I said, I need directions to your group. He said, do you need a ride? I said, buddy, I asked you for directions. Can you handle giving me directions? Because, see, I don't need anything from you. 6 months sober, and I hitchhiked to my first meeting in Fort Worth, Texas. And I walked in, and a red-headed lady came walking up to me. And her name was Nadine. And she said, hi, darling, and hugged me. And I knocked her on her rear end. In Denver, it had gotten to the point when the gentleman approached me that I was allowed in AA meetings as long as I had a man on each side of me. I could not come in early and I could not leave late. I could not turn over tables if I didn't like the conversation or the discussion. I could not steal. Could not give out my phone number. I couldn't watch for an Al-Anon to walk in with her husband and run and sit down on his lap just to watch her reaction. It took me about 3 days in Fort Worth, and I had the same thing. I had male escorts. See, I had a real problem with Al-Anons. Not because I didn't like them, but because of what I heard. I heard they were sicker than we were. I heard that from alcoholics. And I've heard a lot of things from alcoholics that have never been heard anywhere else. We're more intelligent than most people. Come on, have you met any dumbasses in AA? More intelligent? Get real. Where's that study come from? We're more delicate. I'm not delicate. But Al-Anons are sick. So I make a trip to Harris Hospital in Fort Worth, and I walk up to this gentleman. I said, "Sir, could you please tell me where your intensive care unit is?" He said, "Certainly, right behind that sign." And so I waited for him to leave, and I stole the sign. And I went to Southwest Group, and I nailed it on the Al-Anon room door. I'd been told over and over, they're sicker than we are. And I don't know about any other AA groups, but my AA group always kept their Al-Anons at the back of the building. And we usually like it where they have to walk through our meeting to get to their room. And Al-Anon's kind of like AA. There's always going to be somebody late for the meeting. Well, it was funny, because this one Al-Anon comes in late, and she's shaking it, and she's hurrying down, and she stops and sees this sign, intensive care unit. The door had been open while the ones that got there on time went in, and she just kind of pales and then turns red and walks into her Al-Anon room. About 3 seconds later, 3 of them came out, and there's always, just like in AA, a head honcho in Al-Anon. The head honcho comes out, and she has and these veins are sticking out, and she's real angry, and she points to the sign. And before she could say anything, I looked at her and I raised my hand. I said, "Lady, I did that." And she says, "Oh, it's okay," and walked back in. Just like everyone else in my life, she was afraid of me. She was afraid of me. Nobody's afraid of me today. I'm not afraid of me today because I can stop me today. Let me tell you how God does his deals. I sponsor an Al-Anon today. I sponsor 2 red-headed women. And I love them. They don't know that, and I'll never tell them. But I truly love them. I stayed sober at that group under supervision for 8 years. And I left because we have another group in Fort Worth called the Harbor Club that rents to an AA group. And I'd been told since I moved to Fort Worth that you don't go to Harbor. Because see, those people there are even more intelligent. They dress real well. Most of their cars have 4 headlights. And they have more money, and they'd never accept you. But somebody burned Southwest Group down. They went in and they poured gasoline and they struck a match. I got asked about it. I didn't burn it down. I didn't like it, but I didn't burn it down. I would have written my name in the ashes if I'd burned it down. Somebody burned it down, and when the group moved, I couldn't. So I went to this other group that would never accept me. And I walked into the door at Harbor with 8 years of continuous sobriety, and a red-headed lady came walking up to me. She's in her 70s. And I'm thinking, "Lady, don't do it. I don't want to knock you on your rear end, but I will. I will." And she walked up to me and she said, "Cricket, my name's Betty G, and I'm going to be your sponsor." And it was kind of like somebody kicked me in the guts, the way it felt when they mentioned traditions and they couldn't kick me out. I said, "Lady, I've been sober 8 years. I don't need a sponsor." And she says, "Okay, I'll make a deal with you. See, I'm real scared of you, Cricket." And I said, "Well, you're fairly intelligent then. You really are fairly intelligent." Because at that point in my life, with 8 years of sobriety, I could still hurt people and not feel, because I was still dead inside with 8 years of sobriety. She took me back to this little office at Harbor, and she set me down, and she opened the big book to chapter 5. And she said, "Cricket, darling, you read me the first portion of chapter 5. And if I believe you truly understand the program of recovery, I will leave you alone and never say another word to you. I said, is that all? She says, yeah. And I started reading. Rarely have we seen a person fail. And I read it all the way through almost. Not quite. I was reading it to her. And Betty G reached over and she took the big book out of my hands. And she said to me, Cricket, you can't read. And I said, wait a minute, lady. I just read you the first portion of chapter 5. She said, no, darling, you're an AA parrot. You've heard it over and over and over. You have it memorized. I had it open to chapter 3. And I thought, what are you going to do now? Who are you going to tell? I've kept this. I've trained myself. Nobody knows. And she said, Cricket, I'm going to take you to TCU. I said, you just told me I'm a dummy and you're taking me to Texas Christian University? She said, yeah. And she took me to Texas Christian University, took me in a little room and introduced me to an older lady. And this lady told me, she said, Cricket, I'm going to teach you to read. I said, go for it, lady, because you can't. You can't. And she said, yeah, Cricket, I can. Because there's only 26 things you need to know. There's only 26 letters. And most of those letters, at the very most, only make 2 sounds. Can you learn that? I thought, 26? Yeah. And she started teaching me to read phonetically. Everything I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous up until that point in my sobriety was what I had seen you walking and heard you talking. It was your truth, not my truth. I stayed in remedial reading for about 2 years. Those people at Harbor Group that would never accept you, would never care about you, changed the way I dressed. Those people made me stop stealing. Those people made me stop lying. Those people taught me how to eat at a table with the proper utensils. Those people made me quit hurting you. They would not allow me to continue to be a vegetable inside the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Those people that were too good for the crickets. My sponsor became very ill. Before she became ill, we started on the most magnificent journey in my life, and it was step 1. And I went before this God, and I said, Dear God, sir, just in case you are, the little 12-year-old that went to you and asked you to never help her feel again, I'm back again. And if there's any way possible, sir, I'd like to feel again. Don't want any special favors. I don't even care if I have to feel bad. But, sir, I'd like to be able to feel again. As my sponsor worked me through the steps and into the traditions and into the service manual, this world that we see out here for the first time in my existence became mine. And it became alive. And it became real. This woman, people tell me sponsors don't tell you what to do. Mine did. And she'd tell me, if you don't want to do it, get another sponsor. If you know the answers, why ask the questions? Thank God she came from a generation of people who knew I didn't know. I didn't want to be what I was. I didn't want people frightened of me. I'd given birth to what I consider the most beautiful female child ever born in this world. On my own, I would hurt her. This group of people taught me I didn't have to. On my own, I would probably take her life because I couldn't stop me. As my sponsor did this deal and this thing in here started opening just like an onion, just peeling a layer, some neat things happened. I could touch my child without anger. I could touch my child as a caress that was appropriate. I could touch my child and have the freedom to be her mother. No one could take that from me because Alcoholics Anonymous gave me the right to be a human. They gave me the right not to be a vegetable. God gave me Harbor. God gave me Betty G. She got sick, real sick, and started dying. And I did everything she told me to do. And my turn came to pay her back. And I'd had about 17 years of sobriety. And I went over and I tucked her in bed. See, part of my ninth step, when we make direct amends wherever possible, there were some I couldn't make because I didn't know who I'd hurt. But I used to steal Social Security checks out of the mail. So for 7 years, my sponsor sentenced me to call bingo at Alcoholics Anonymous every Saturday night for the senior citizens to make that amend for stealing these checks. And I did it every Saturday night for 7 years. If one of yours was missing and you think I did it, let me pay you. I don't want to call bingo anymore. I truly don't. I'll pay you. I'll take your word that I stole it from you, unless you lived in Texas at the time. I went by my sponsor's home one Saturday night on Valentine's Day about 4 or 5 years ago. And I took her 6 live yellow tulips, and I cleaned her up and put her in a lavender nightgown. And I tucked her in her bed after I fed her biscuits and sausage for supper. And she looked up at me, and old people have earned every line on their face. Every line on their face tells an entire story if we get out of just looking at here. And see, my sponsor had deep crevices down her cheeks. And she looked up at me, and probably for the millionth time, my sponsor said to me, "Cricket, darling, you know I love you." And a tear streamed down one of those little crevices. And I put my finger at the end, and I caught that tear, and I traced it back up. And for the first time, I looked at my sponsor, and I said, "Betty G, I love you too." And I left, and I went down and called bingo. And I went home, and I called her. I said, "Betty, this is Cricket. Do you need anything?" She said, "No, Cricket, you're my legacy." And I said, "Okay, see you in the morning." And I hung up, and my daughter and I went over the next morning. I've never knocked on my sponsor's door. I've just walked in. I had a key to her house, a key to her car. I could sign on her checking account. She was a judge's daughter with a doctorate's degree. She loved me more than anybody in the whole wide world, kind of the way God loves me. Just, I'm the pet, you know, and I know that in here, whether you believe it or not, I know. And I walked in her house, and I said, "Betty G, I'm home." And she said, "Nothing." Always before it was, "I'm in here, darling." There was no answer. And I told my daughter, "Wait here." And I ran upstairs, and I said, "Betty G, I'm home." Nothing. And I went into the bathroom, and my sponsor had died. And I knelt down beside her, and I wrapped my arms around her. My prayer was answered, my friends. I felt again. See, this is a lady that cared enough to give spiritual life to a human being that some other woman had given physical life to. That's what male sponsors do. They father spiritually somebody that another man fathered physically. And we dare to say, "We don't need you. We don't have to do what you tell us." We better start, because the day can come where we can't do this. Because the day can come where we destroy this. Preconceived notions, notions we hear about God, I don't know where, and we bring them into Alcoholics Anonymous. This is my life. Alcoholics Anonymous not only sobered me up, they made me what I think is a borderline lady. They made me what I think is a good mother. They made me what I think is a good friend. They made me what I think is a good employee. Because I've been sober, if I don't take a drink, October the 19th, I'll have 23 years of continuous sobriety. The happiest time of my sobriety today is when I get to kneel down and clean up a puking drunk. I never feel quite as good about my recovery as when I'm allowed to share it. The only difference with me being up here and you being out there is because they asked me to be up here. My program's no better. My story's no better. I'm no different. I'm no different. I want to be one of you. I want to be able to hold your hand and not feel disgust because your skin's touching my skin. I want to be Cricket. Just me. Don't want blonde hair. I found out you can get that anywhere. I've got store-bought teeth because I love corn on the cob, you know? But I don't even care about that. It wouldn't bother me if I didn't have any. Babies are adorable bald and without teeth, and I think I'll be real cute when I'm 70. This meeting today is a replay of millions of meetings all over the United States and the world, I understand. But if we don't keep it this way, this freedom's not ours. And we have freedom because we have boundaries. I don't want to go back to the day where I have no boundaries. My boundaries will not allow me to violate my anonymity at a public level. And I've been asked to often. And I could make money doing that. And you know, when my gas bill's not paid, my electricity's getting cut off, the temptation has came. But I have to remember, no, they set that boundary. Those people. And if we ever know more than the people who've walked ahead of us, then we're in serious trouble. The most important message you can give to another alcoholic or an Al-Anon or an Alateen today is touch the one you don't want to. Speak to the one you don't like. And don't allow a cricket to come in and destroy your group. Put boundaries up. Protect the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and keep the door open for me, because I need it more today than I did in 1969. For my life, for my child, for my home. I've got a home. I've got a little house on the south side of Fort Worth that's yellow. And you walk inside and you've got an orange room, a green room, a blue room. It's alive. I've got windows where light shines through. My daughter doesn't hide behind a wood stove. When the sun goes down, my daughter comes in. She's 14 years old and she'll sit on my lap. You know why? Because we're free. We're free. Don't take my freedom from me and I won't take yours from you. Thank you for my life.